The day my mother conceived me, I became aware of the world outside. My parents were happy. Or at least they seemed to be. I also had an older sister, Hannah. She was my father's daughter from his first marriage. The day they found out about my existence, Hannah tore her bedroom apart. "You already have me," she screamed. Her voice muffled but sharp through the walls of the womb. "Why do you need another one? You have to choose. Right now. It's either her or me." Mother didn't answer her. She only whispered to herself that a baby was a gift. A twist of fate. Meant to be. But to Hannah, it was a betrayal. She began to act out. Constantly searching for ways to claw back their attention. It escalated until the day I was brought home from the hospital. She walked over to my bassinet. She reached in and poked my cheek. Her finger hard and cold. "You're their real daughter," she whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. "With you here, they'll never love me again. There's only room for one of us. But I don't want to lose my mom and dad. So could you just leave?" Before I could even register her words, Hannah's hands found my neck. She squeezed slowly, deliberately. The air left me. The world began to dim into a terrible, bruised purple. I wanted to cry. But Hannah was the one who wept first. Her warm tears fell splashing against my cold cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she sobbed. Suddenly the suffocating pressure vanished. There was a sickening crack. And I watched Hannah fly backward, crashing heavily against the hardwood floor. "Are you out of your mind, Hannah?" My father roared, his eyes bloodshot as he stood over her. "She's your sister. How could you do that to a baby?" Kicked her hard. Twice in the ribs before gently scooping me into his arms. "She's not my sister," Hannah choked out, curling into a ball on the floor and clutching her stomach. "She's yours and Laura's, but I am." She couldn't finish the sentence. It was true. I belonged to both of them. But Hannah belonged to my father. And a woman who had abandoned them years ago. It was a truth she couldn't bear to voice. "You are completely insane," my father yelled. "First you try to poison your mother. And now you try to strangle your sister. How did I raise such a monster?" On the nearby sofa, my mother, still weak from labor, struggled to her feet. She rushed over, panic written across her pale face. "My sweet girl, are you okay?" At the moment, my mother saw the angry red handprints bruising my tiny neck. Her face contorted with grief. She marched over to Hannah and slapped her across the face, hard. The sound cracked through the room. Hannah's head snapped to the side. She looked up, her eyes wide without her shock. You dare to hit me." My mother's hands were shaking violently. "Since the day I married your father, I have treated you like my own flesh and blood. I gave you the best of everything. I let it go when you tried to hurt me. But today you tried to murder my baby. How am I supposed to ignore this? How? I carried her for 9 months." Hannah did. My mother collapsed onto her knees, sobbing hysterically. But Hannah scrambled backward, her face flushed with rage. "Liar. You hit me because I'm not yours. You never would have touched me before she was born. But it's as of her. You hate me because of her. The moment a stepmother gets her own kid, the father turns into a stranger, too." Tears still drying on my eyelashes, I stared blankly at Hannah. Deep down, I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. Ever since my parents had found out about me, their eyes had rarely drifted to her. When Hannah had a fever a few weeks ago, they had simply told her to take some aspirin and drink water. The night she ran away, they hadn't even noticed she was gone. Until she crept back through the front door, crying. A heavy, instinctive guilt settled in my tiny chest. I forced my crying to stop. I looked at Hannah, stretched out my small, fragile hands, and tried to offer her a smile. The syllable was clumsy and slurred. But in the quiet room it was unmistakable. My parents frozen. Surprise. Even Hannah went, still staring at me. "Did you hear that, Hannah?" My father whispered, being closer to her and holding me out slightly. "Your sister is calling for you. Look at her. Even after what you did. She's smiling at you. See? Don't be so petty. You're the older sister." Seeing Hannah's bewildered expression, I smiled wider. I wanted her to know that my birth didn't mean she would lose their love. It just meant there was one more person in the world to love her. But in the next heartbeat, Hannah lunged forward, her fingers wrapped around my throat again, squeezing with terrifying strength. "Are you mocking me? You think you've won because they love you more?" Before my parents could react, the front door flew open. My grandma Ruth, who had been waiting outside, rushed in and violently dragged Hannah away from me. My father stumbled backward, cradling me against his chest, murmuring frantic comforts. You ungrateful brat. She is a baby. Her very first word was sister. And you still tried to kill her. I want her dead. Up. Another strike. Cut her off. I had already lost count of how many times she had been hit today. From the corner of the room, my grandpa George let out a heavy, tired sigh. If we had known it would turn out like this, we never would have fought so hard for custody. We should have let you go with your gambling mother. At least then you wouldn't be here ruining this family. A ruin? Hannah flinched as if she had been struck by lightning. She slowly raised her head, looking at the grandfather who used to buy her ice cream. And finally at my parents. Is that what you all think of me? The room fell into a suffocating silence. My mother looked away first. My father lowered his gaze, tightening his grip on me. Their silence was the loudest answer of all. But it hadn't always been this way. Before they knew I existed, I knew they loved Hannah. My father used to lift her high above his head when he came home from work, laughing. That's my smart girl. Straight A's again. I'm so proud of you, Hannah. My mother used to sit her down every morning, gently braiding her hair with colorful ribbons, before walking her to school. That warmth had been real. I had felt it through the quiet thrum of the house. I had looked forward to joining a family that possessed so much love. Until they found me. As my mother's belly grew, she no longer had the energy to wake up early and braid Hannah's hair. My father's attention shifted entirely to nursery color swatches and baby monitors. He even made Hannah move into the smaller guest room, so her bedroom could be converted into my nursery. And then there was the school field day. They had promised they would be there. Hannah had waited by the school gates from morning until dusk. But they never showed up. All because that afternoon, I had kicked my mother's stomach. Just a tiny, fluttery kick. But it was enough for them to panic, rush to the doctor, and completely forget about the daughter waiting in the schoolyard. When Hannah had finally walked through the door that night, she was shaking with rage and heartbreak. You promised. He had screamed, throwing her backpack at the wall. Why didn't you come? Do you have any idea how long It was just a field day, my father had snapped, interrupting her. You've had dozens of them. Your sister kicked your mother's stomach today. We had to make sure she was safe. None of your school games are more important than your sister's life. Hannah had stood there frozen, as if trying to translate a foreign language. And then she had flipped the dining table. You already have me. Why do you need another one? You have to choose. Right now it's either her or me. Hannah's crying and screaming went on for what felt like hours. Finally, Grandma Ruth lost all patience. She grabbed Hannah by the arm and began dragging her toward the door. That's enough. Your mother just gave birth. She's weak, and you're here howling like a banshee. Do you want to kill her? You're coming with me. But Hannah didn't care about the physical pain. She dug her heels into the floor, desperately grabbing onto the door frame. Dad. Mom, answer me. She pleaded, her eyes searching theirs. I'm not a ruin, right? Tell me I'm not. My father opened his mouth, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. But Grandma Ruth yanked her out. Before he could speak, the heavy front door clicked shut. The apartment fell into a profound, hollow quiet. My mother looked down at me, forcing a tired smile. At least our little Gracie is good. Look at her. So quiet and sweet. Such a good baby. But she let out a long sigh. If only your sister had half your temperament. They're raised in the same house. So how can they be so different? My father walked over, his fingers gently tracing the red marks on my neck. That little psycho. He muttered, his voice darkening. She actually tried to hurt a baby. Why couldn't she take it out on me? Why does she have to be so vicious? His anger simmered, hardening into resentment. When she comes back, I'm going to teach her a lesson she won't forget. We spoiled her. She's starting to act exactly like her mother. Wild, fishy, and unstable. Vicious. Just like her mother. Even inside my blanket, my tiny heart flinched at his words. I was glad Hannah had been taken away. I was glad she hadn't heard that. I squirmed in my swaddle, making soft, cooing sounds, trying to tell them that Hannah wasn't bad. She was just terrified of being erased. But I couldn't speak. I could only make meaningless baby noises. My mother smiled, completely misinterpreting my efforts. Look at Gracie, trying to make her mommy feel better. 5 days later, my mother was discharged and we returned home. The moment we walked through the door, Hannah was there, waiting. My parents instantly stepped in front of me, shielding me from her view. But Hannah only let out a hollow, dry laugh. She slowly rolled up her sleeves. Her arms were covered in angry, Overlapping welts, some red and fresh. Others dark purple and scabbing over. Grandma educated me, Hannah said. Her eyes fixed on my parents. I won't be jealous of the baby anymore. So you'll still love me like you used to, right? She stared at them, begging for reassurance. But my parents only looked at each other, letting out a collective sigh of relief. My father stepped forward and patted her head. Of course, Hannah. You'll always be our sweet girl. They were so happy that she had finally learned her lesson. That neither of them asked a single question about the horrific marks on her arms. Hannah lowered her head, slowly pulling her sleeves back down. I remembered how just a few months ago, if Hannah so much as scraped her knee, my parents would hover over her, kissing the scratch and comforting her until she smiled. Now she was covered in bruises, and they chose to look right past them. Hannah seemed to have truly changed. She helped my father carry the heavy stroller, and she even washed my baby bottles without being asked. Standing in the kitchen, my father whispered to my mother, I guess letting your mother handle her was the right call. She's actually behaving now. Hannah's hands frozen in the soapy water. Then she slowly resumed scrubbing. So my parents had authorized the beating. That was why they didn't ask. Hannah dried her hands, turned around, and looked at my father. I'm finished, she said quietly. I really won't hurt Gracie again. I understand now. My father took the clean bottle. I'm glad you understand. Your mother and I won't stop loving you just because of the baby. You're both our children. My mother smiled warmly. From the living room in my bassinet, I let out a soft gurgle. I thought that despite everything, our family was finally going to be okay. I promised myself that when I grew up, I would explain everything to our parents, so they would never misunderstand Hannah again. Later that afternoon, my parents went into the nursery to organize my clothes, leaving Hannah and me alone in the living room. I wiggled, reaching my tiny hands out toward her, making soft sis sounds. Hannah walked over to the bassinet, her expression guarded and complex. You don't hate me after what I did to you? I shook my head as best as my little body could, continuing to reach for her. Begging for a hug froze you. You want me to hold you? I blinked, letting out a happy coo. She hesitated, her bruised fingers trembling as she slowly reached down toward me. But just as her hand was about to touch my blanket, a heavy slipper flew across the room, striking her squarely in the face. Hannah stumbled backward, gasping as her head snapped to the side. You liar! My father screamed, rushing into the room. You said you wouldn't hurt her. I knew you were pretending. Were you trying to choke her again? I wasn't. Hannah shrieked, her voice cracking as she collapsed into tears. She was reaching for me. She wanted me to hold her. My father didn't listen. He snatched me out of the bassinet, shielding me behind his back. She's a newborn. She doesn't know how to ask for hugs. You almost killed her last time. And now you're trying to finish the job. His chest heaved, his lips trembling with rage. My mother emerged from the nursery. She didn't yell. She just stood there, looking at Hannah with a profound, quiet disappointment. But that silent disappointment was far more lethal than any slap. I panicked. Why couldn't they see? I began to squirm violently, crying out to stop them from hurting her. But my father only held me tighter. Did she scare you, my sweet girl? Daddy's here. You're safe. I didn't do anything. I didn't hurt her. Hannah screamed, taking a desperate step forward to explain. But my father instinctively took a step back, shielding me further. Just half a step. But it was enough to freeze Hannah in her tracks. The frantic energy drained from her body, leaving her completely hollow. She whispered, her voice barely audible. You never believed me. All those promises about still loving me, they were all lies. She turned and bolted out the front door. Hannah, don't you dare walk out that door. My father roared after her. But she was already gone, her footsteps echoing down the stairwell. My mother made a move toward the door, but my father grabbed her arm. Don't go after her. She has nowhere else to go. She'll be back when she gets hungry. But a week passed, and Hannah never came home. And my parents never went to look for her. It's been over a week, my mother murmured one evening, staring blankly at the dinner table. Do you think she's okay? My father didn't lift his head, expertly taping a fresh diaper onto me. What could happen to her? She's probably throwing a tantrum at your mother's place. She's got a wild streak. Nobody's going to mess with her. My mother didn't reply. I should call my mom, just to check before she could reach for her phone. The doorbell rang. My father smiled, picking me up. See? What did I tell you? She ran out of steam and came back on her own. We worried for nothing. My mother let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days, and rushed to open the door. But it wasn't Hannah. Grandma Ruth stood on the doormat, holding a plastic bag filled with baby rattles and stuffed animals. I came to see my little angel. She smiled, stepping inside. She's grown so much in just a few days. Then her face turned serious. Oh, by the way, you two need to lock your doors. The neighborhood watch said there's a predator wandering around the West District. Some sick monster targeting young kids. Keep Gracie close. My father waved his hand dismissively. We're with Gracie 24 hours a day. No one is getting near her. My mother, however, was still looking past Grandma Ruth into the empty hallway. Mom, where's Hannah? Didn't she come with you? Grandma Ruth frowned. What do you mean? Why would she be with me? The color drained from my mother's face. Hannah ran away a week ago. We thought she was staying with you. Grandma Ruth sighed, shaking her head. She's run away before. She's probably at one of her aunt's houses. Just text the family group chat and ask. She just trying to scare you. My mother's hand shook as she unlocked her phone. But before she could open her messages, the phone began to ring. It was an unknown local number. My mother pressed answer, her voice trembling. Hello? Hello? Is this the family of Hannah Lynn? This is the precinct detective's office. We have recovered the body of a young female matching her description. We need you to come in for an identification. The air in the police station smelled of stale filter coffee, damp overcoats, and a sharp, chemical disinfectant that couldn't quite mask the scent of old dust. I was tucked beneath my mother's coat, pressed so tightly against her collarbone that I could hear the erratic, bird-like fluttering of her collar. She didn't look at my father. He didn't look at her. They sat on a low bench with vinyl seats that squeaked every time one of them shifted their weight. Grandma Ruth sat on a separate chair across from us, her leather handbag gripped in both hands like a shield. Her knuckles were white, the skin stretched thin over her arthritic joints. It's a mistake, my father muttered for the fourth time. He was staring at a grease stain on the linoleum floor between his shoes. The police make these mistakes all the time. They find some runaway, some street kid, and they look at a database and grab the first name they see. Hannah is at her aunt's. Or she's hiding in some diner down by the highway, trying to make us feel guilty. That's what she does. She wants attention. Arthur, my mother whispered. Her voice was thin, like wet tissue paper. Please. I'm just saying, he snapped, his voice rising slightly before he remembered where he was and dragged it back down to a harsh whisper. We didn't do anything wrong. We gave her a roof. We gave her food. We tried to discipline her because she was out of control. Any parent would have done the same. A detective in a gray suit came out of a door at the end of the hall. He didn't look like the detectives on the television screens my parents sometimes left on while they slept. He looked tired, his shoulders sloped, his tie slightly askew. He held a small yellow notepad. Mr. and Mrs. Lynn, he asked. My father stood up too quickly, his knee knocking against the plastic armrest. Yes. I'm Arthur. This is my wife, Laura. And my mother, Ruth. Look, officer. There's been a massive misunderstanding. My daughter Hannah, she's headstrong. She runs off. We were actually just about to go pick her up from. Mr. Lynn, the detective interrupted. His voice wasn't angry, it was entirely flat, the voice of a man who had delivered this particular script 100 times. We need you to come downstairs. Just one of you is fine, but if you both want to come, I'll go, my father said immediately. He looked down at my mother, who was staring at the floor, her hands trembling around my swaddled body. Laura, stay here with Gracie. Ruth, watch them. He followed the detective through the heavy door. The door took a long time to click shut behind them. When it did, the silence in the waiting room became heavy, pressing down on my chest. I wiggled my toes inside my woolen socks, trying to find comfort in the warmth of my mother's body, but she was freezing. Her skin felt like marble. She brought this on herself, Grandma Ruth whispered suddenly. My mother flinched. She didn't look up, but her grip on me tightened so hard I had to let out a tiny, soft gasp. Don't you start, Ruth, my mother said, her voice barely a breath. I'm only saying what's true, Ruth insisted, leaning forward, her face lined with a hard, bitter self-righteousness. A child who doesn't respect her elders. Who tries to strangle her own sister. She was rotten from the root, Laura. You tried. Arthur tried. But some vessels are just cracked from the kiln. You can't pour love into something that won't hold it. My mother didn't answer. A single, heavy tear escaped her eye and fell, warm and wet, right onto my cheek. I didn't cry. I only watched her, my small baby eyes reflecting the yellow glare of the fluorescent tubes overhead. I remembered the sound of the front door clicking shut a week ago. I remembered the silence that followed. At least our little Gracie is good, my mother had said then. So quiet. And sweet. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't good because I was different. I was just too small to fight back yet. 20 minutes later, the door at the end of the hall opened. My father didn't walk out. He stumbled. His face was the color of curdled milk. And his mouth was slightly open, his lower lip trembling. The detective walked beside him, holding him by the elbow, not out of kindness, but to keep him from collapsing onto the linoleum. Arthur? Grandma Ruth stood up, her handbag slipping to the floor, spilling a compact mirror and a roll of peppermint sweets. Arthur, what is it? It isn't her, is it? Tell them it isn't her. My father looked at his mother. Then he looked at my mother. He didn't say a word. He slowly shook his head, then put his hands over his face and let out a sound, not a cry, but a dry, rattling gasp, like someone who had just had the air kicked out of their lungs. The detective looked at my mother with a quiet, observant intensity that made my tiny heart skip a beat. It's her, the detective said. Hannah Lynn. The body was identified by her dental records and personal belongings. We found her in an abandoned brick kiln near the West District Canal. My mother didn't scream. She didn't make a sound. She simply stared at my father, her eyes wide and glassy, as if she were looking at a stranger. But that's not all, the detective continued, his eyes shifting from my father to Grandma Ruth, and then down to the bundle in my mother's arms. The medical examiner noted several injuries that didn't occur at the time of death. Older injuries. Extensive deep tissue bruising on her back, shoulders, and arms. Some of them looked like they were inflicted with a blunt, flexible object. Like a belt. Or a switch. The waiting room went so cold I could feel the draft on my nose. She was a difficult child, Grandma Ruth stammered, her voice suddenly losing its sharp edge, turning high and defensive. She was self-destructive. She used to throw herself against things. She was wild. We'll need to take formal statements from all of you, the detective interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a cold, professional weight. And we've already contacted Child Protective Services regarding the infant. My father's head snapped up. What? No. Gracie has nothing to do with this. She's a baby. We love her. We protect her. We have to follow protocol, Mr. Lynn, the detective said, his eyes resting on me. When a child dies under these circumstances, and there are signs of chronic abuse on the body, we have to ensure the safety of any other minors in the home. For the first time in my short life, I saw my parents clearly. They weren't the tall, all-powerful giants who ruled my universe. They were small, terrified creatures, trapped in a cage they had built with their own hands, and the iron bars were slowly beginning to heat up. We returned to the apartment late that night, but it wasn't the same place we had left. The air felt thin and sour. My mother didn't put me in my bassinet in the living room. She carried me into their bedroom and laid me in the center of their large double bed. She sat beside me on the edge of the mattress, her back hunched, her hands clasped tightly between her knees. My father was pacing the hallway. I could hear his footsteps, heavy, rhythmic, tireless. Creak, squeak, creak. They think we did it, he whispered, sticking his head into the bedroom. His eyes were red, the skin beneath them dark and swollen. That detective, he was looking at me like I was some kind of monster. I didn't kill her. I wasn't even there. I was at work. You were here. We didn't do anything. Arthur, stop, my mother said. She didn't look at him. The bruises. They saw the bruises. That was my mother, he yelled, though he kept his voice muffled, a strange choke sound. Ruth did that. She said she was educating her. She said that's how you deal with a spoiled brat. I didn't touch her arms. I only kicked her that once because she tried to choke Gracie. I was protecting our baby. That's defense. That's not abuse. And what about the field day? My mother asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of any anger, which somehow made it sound much worse. What about the night she ran away the first time, and we went to bed without looking for her? What about the aspirin? Arthur, she was 12. She was 12 years old, and she died in an Abandoned brick kiln because we didn't want to look at her bruises. She was 13, my father corrected, his voice cracking. The room went completely silent. My mother slowly turned her head to look at him. She turned 13 last month. We forgot her birthday, Arthur. We were at the hospital for my third semester checkup. We promised we'd make it up to her on the weekend, but then the nursery furniture arrived, and we had to assemble it. She didn't finish the sentence. She covered her face with her hands, but she didn't cry. Her grief was too heavy for tears now. It was a solid, stony thing that sat in her chest, suffocating her. I lay on the bed, staring up at the ceiling where the shadows of the streetlights danced like pale fingers. I wanted to reach out, to touch my mother's hand, but my fingers were too short, my muscles too weak. I could only make a soft coo sound. My father walked over to the bed. He looked down at me, and for a second, I saw something flick across his face that terrified me. It wasn't love. It wasn't even pity. It was a cold, hard resentment. It was because of her, he whispered. My mother froze. What did you say? If she hadn't been born, my father said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register, Hannah would still be here. We would have been happy. We were happy, Laura. Remember? We used to go to the park. I used to carry Hannah on my shoulders. We didn't have these fights. We didn't have the police in our house. This baby. She ruined everything. Arthur. How can you say that? My mother scrambled up, shielding me with her body, just as they had shielded me from Hannah a week ago. Gracie is an infant. She didn't do anything. She's innocent. Is she? My father let out a dry, bitter laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping across concrete. Look at her. She doesn't even cry. Normal babies cry when there's tension in the room. She just sits there, watching us with those creepy, quiet eyes. She's like a little judge. A little spy we let into our house. You're losing your mind, my mother whispered, her face pale. Get out of this room. Go sleep on the couch. My father didn't argue. He looked at me one last time, a long, lingering look that felt like a cold draft, and then turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. That night, I had my first dream. I was back in the womb, surrounded by the warm, red darkness. But I wasn't alone. Hannah was there, too. She wasn't 13, she was my size, small and fragile, her arms covered in those terrible dark purple welts. She was holding me, her grip tight but not painful. You're their real daughter, she whispered in the dark of my dream. With you here, they'll never love me again. But I don't want to lose them, Gracie. I don't want to be the ruin. I woke up with a gasp, my tiny lungs burning. The room was dark, save for the blue light of the digital clock on the nightstand. It was 3:14 a.m. Beside me, my mother was asleep, her breathing shallow and ragged. And from the corner of the room, near the closet where the baby clothes were stored, I heard a sound. Scratch. 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 It was the sound of fingernails on wood. Gentle. Rhythmic. I turned my head toward the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I could smell it, the scent of cold rain, wet earth, and the faint, sweet smell of the strawberry shampoo my father had bought for Hannah's 12th birthday. Sis. I tried to whisper. My tongue felt heavy, a clumsy lump of meat in my mouth. Sis. The scratching stopped. A shadow seemed to detach itself from the closet door, moving slowly toward the side of the bed. It was taller than a baby, but shorter than my parents. It stopped right at the edge of the mattress, where the light from the street lamp fell across the sheets. I saw a pale hand, the fingers thin and bruised, reach out. It didn't have a weapon. It didn't try to squeeze my neck. It just hovered over my blanket, as if wanting to touch the warmth, but too afraid of leaving a stain. Gracie, a voice whispered. It wasn't the angry, screaming voice from the womb, nor the quiet, dangerous whisper from the bassinet. It was just a child's voice, tired, cold, and desperately lonely. They're going to hate you now. Too. You know that, right? I reached my small hands out into the cold air. I wanted to tell her I knew. I wanted to tell her I was sorry. But before the shadow could touch me, my mother stirred, turning over with a heavy sigh. The shadow vanished back into the closet, leaving behind only the smell of wet earth and the lingering chill of a cold kiln. The investigation didn't take long. In a small town, a dead child with a body covered in old scars is a fire that burns through every department until someone is consumed by the flames. The police didn't have to look far for the culprit. Grandma Ruth, terrified of going to prison, tried to blame my mother. She told the detectives that Laura was the one who couldn't stand the sight of her stepdaughter, that Laura had demanded Hannah be disciplined so the new baby wouldn't be threatened. But my mother had kept a diary. It wasn't a diary of thoughts, but a calendar on the kitchen wall. Every time Grandma Ruth had taken Hannah for the weekend to teach her some manners, my mother had written it down in green ink. Hannah with Ruth. Ruth picking up Hannah. And on the days after those entries, the school nurse had logged 3 separate visits where Hannah had complained of falling down the stairs or tripping in the yard. The arrest of Ruth Lynn made the front page of the local gazette. The headline read, "Local grandmother charged with felony child abuse. Investigation into runaway's death ongoing." They didn't charge my parents with murder. The medical examiner determined that Hannah had died of hypothermia and acute exposure, complicated by malnutrition, after hiding in the abandoned kiln during a 3-day rainstorm. She hadn't been murdered by a predator. The monster Grandma Ruth had warned them about wasn't in the West District. The monster had been sitting in our living room, eating dinner with us, and telling us to lock our doors. The day of the custody hearing was gray and rainy. I was 6 months old now. I could sit up on my own, and my eyes had turned a deep, dark brown, almost black. My mother had stopped dressing me in bright colors. She kept me in plain white or gray onesies, as if trying to make me as invisible as possible. The courtroom was small, smelling of old paper and floor wax. Grandma Ruth sat at the defense table, looking suddenly 10 years older. Her hair, usually coiffed into a tight, perfect silver helmet, was loose and wispy. She didn't look at us. The judge, a woman with sharp spectacles and a mouth that looked like a surgical incision, looked down at the documents in front of her. "Mr. and Mrs. Lynn," the judge said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "The reports from the social worker are troubling. While there is no direct evidence that either of you physically assaulted Hannah Lynn to the degree that her grandmother did, your systematic neglect of her emotional and physical well-being is undeniable. You ignored visible injuries. You failed to report her missing for 7 days. You prioritized your newborn child to the point of total abandonment of a vulnerable minor." My father stood at the podium, his shoulders hunched. He was wearing his only suit, which was now too big for him. He had lost 20 pounds in the last 6 months. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking. We were overwhelmed. The baby was difficult. My wife had postpartum depression. We thought Hannah was safe with my mother. We didn't know. "You didn't look," the judge said flatly. "That is the definition of neglect. Mr. Lynn. You chose not to see what was right in front of your face because it was easier than dealing with the complications of your blended family." She tapped her pen against the desk, a sharp, rhythmic sound that reminded me of the scratching on my bedroom wall. "This court is placing Gracie Lynn under temporary protective custody," the judge announced. My mother let out a sharp, choked cry, reaching out to grab my father's sleeve. However, the judge continued, "Given the cooperation of Mrs. Laura Lynn with the prosecution of Ruth Lynn, and the fact that the home environment is currently undergoing intensive counseling, we will allow the infant to remain in the home under strict supervision. There will be weekly, unannounced visits from a social worker. Any infraction, any sign of neglect, physical discipline, or failure to provide a stable environment, will result in the immediate removal of the child. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," my mother sobbed, her head bowing until her forehead touched the wooden railing of the gallery. "Yes. Thank you. Thank you." My father didn't say thank you. He stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the empty space beside Grandma Ruth's table, as if he expected to see a 13-year-old girl sitting there, laughing at him. When we left the courthouse, the reporters were waiting on the steps. Their flashbulbs popped, casting harsh, white light across our faces. My father pushed his way through them, his face dark and angry, while my mother held me tightly against her shoulder, covering my face with her hand. "Did you do it for the baby?" one reporter yelled, thrusting a microphone toward my mother's face. "Did you get rid of the stepdaughter to keep the inheritance for your own child?" "Leave us alone," my father roared, turning around and shoving a camera away. "She's a baby. Get that thing out of her face." In the chaos, my mother's hand slipped from my cheek. I looked over her shoulder, out into the rainy street. There, standing across the road by a rusted bus stop, was a girl in a yellow raincoat. The hood was pulled up, but I could see her face. It was pale, almost translucent, her eyes dark and hollow. She wasn't holding an umbrella. The rain fell right through her, not splashing on her shoulders, but disappearing into the gray mist. She didn't look angry. She just looked curious. She raised her hand, the fingers thin, the fingernails dirty, and gave me a slow, gentle wave. See you at home, Gracie, her silent lips seemed to say. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just raised my tiny, chubby hand and waved back. The social worker's name was Sarah. She was a young woman with a kind face and a clipboard that she carried like an extra limb. She came every Tuesday at 2:00 p.m. For the first few weeks, my parents tried to play the part of the perfect family. The apartment was scrubbed until it smelled of bleach and pine. The pantry was stocked with organic baby food, and my toys were arranged in neat, colorful rows in the living room. But you can't scrub away the smell of a ghost. My father had stopped going to work. He spent his days sitting in the armchair, in the corner of the living room, staring at the blank television screen. He didn't watch me. He didn't hold me. If I made a sound, he would flinch, his shoulders tensing as if he had been struck. Arthur, my mother said one afternoon, her voice tight with exhaustion. You need to help me. I haven't slept in 3 days. She's teething. She won't stop crying. Then make her stop, he said, not turning his head. I've tried. I've given her medicine, I've rocked her, she just wants to be held, Arthur. Just hold her for 10 minutes so I can take a shower. No. My mother froze, a wet washcloth in her hand. What do you mean, no? I'm not touching her, my father said, his voice flat and dead. Every time I touch her, I think of Hannah. I think of how I held Hannah when she was a baby. I think of how I used to tell her she was my favorite girl. And then I look at this one, and I realize I traded my daughter's life for a replacement. She is not a replacement, my mother screamed, her voice cracking as she threw the washcloth onto the floor. She is your daughter. Your flesh and blood. How can you be so cruel? She's your daughter, Laura, my father said, finally turning his head to look at her. His eyes were bloodshot, his beard overgrown and greasy. She's the one you wanted. You're the one who couldn't stand Hannah being in the house. You're the one who complained every time I bought her a toy instead of buying baby clothes. You killed her just as much as my mother did. You just did it with your mouth instead of your hands. My mother staggered back as if she had been slapped. Her face went entirely white, her lips trembling. I loved Hannah, she whispered. You loved the idea of being a good stepmother, my father sneered, rising slowly from the chair. He looked taller now, his shadow stretching across the ceiling in the afternoon sun. But the moment you got your own gift, your own twist of fate, you threw her to the wolves. And now we have to live with this thing. This baby who doesn't even cry like a normal human being. He walked toward the door, grabbing his jacket from the hook. Where are you going? My mother cried. Out, he said. Don't wait up. The door slammed shut. The sound cracked through the apartment, vibrating through the floorboards, straight into my crib. My mother collapsed onto her knees, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, silent sobs. I sat in my crib, watching her. I wanted to tell her that I didn't want this either. I didn't ask to be the gift. I didn't ask to take Hannah's room. I would have been happy to stay in the dark, warm womb forever, where no one had to choose between us. The sun slowly set, casting long, bloody red streaks across the carpet. The apartment grew dark. My mother didn't turn on the lights. She stayed on the floor, her quiet weeping turning into a dull, rhythmic breathing as she finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, her head resting against the sofa cushions. And then, the temperature in the room dropped. It wasn't a gradual chill, it was a sudden, icy plunge that made my breath turn to white steam in the air. Creak. The door to my nursery, the door that had once been Hannah's bedroom door, slowly swung open. I didn't feel afraid. I crawled to the edge of the crib, pulling myself up on the wooden slats, my dark eyes fixed on the hallway. A figure stood in the doorway. It was Hannah. But she didn't look like the girl in the yellow raincoat anymore. Her skin was a bruised, mottled purple, her hair wet and matted with dark mud. Her fingers were long and thin, ending in broken, dirty fingernails. She walked toward my crib, her footsteps silent, her body leaving dark, wet patches on the carpet where she stepped. She stopped right in front of me. They're going to leave you, Gracie, she whispered. Her voice sounded like water running over stones in a deep, dark well. They don't want you anymore. You're the ruin now. I reached my hand out through the slats, my small fingers brushing against her cold, wet cheek. Sis, I whispered. Hannah's eyes, wide and hollow, softened slightly. A single, dark tear rolled down her cheek, leaving a trail of gray mud. I wanted to love you, she said. When they told me about you, I was so angry. But then I saw you, you were so small. You didn't do anything wrong. But they made me choose, Gracie. They made us choose. She reached her cold hand into the crib, her fingers wrapping gently around my wrist. Her touch was freezing, like ice on bare skin, but I didn't pull away. Come with me, she whispered. In the kiln, it's cold, but it's quiet. No one screams there. No one hits you. No one tells you you're a monster. We can just be sisters. I looked at her. Then I looked at my mother, still asleep on the floor, her face pale and lined with grief, even in her dreams. I looked at the dark hallway, where my father's empty coat hung like a dead skin on the wall. I nodded. I climbed up the wooden slats of my crib. My body was small, but my will was strong. I tumbled over the edge, expecting to hit the hard hardwood floor, but Hannah caught me. Her arms were cold and smelled of old rain, but they were strong. She held me against her chest, wrapping her wet, muddy coat around my small body. Let's go, Gracie, she whispered. She turned and walked toward the window. The window was closed, but as we approached, the glass didn't shatter, it simply rippled like water, letting us pass through into the cold, wet night. When my mother woke up the next morning, the sun was bright and harsh, blinding her as she struggled to her feet. Gracie, she called out, her voice hoarse. She rushed to the nursery. The crib was empty. The blanket was folded neatly at the foot of the mattress. But in the center of the sheet, there was a small, wet patch of dark, gray mud. On the wall above the crib, where my father had painted the pink letters of my name, Gracie, the paint had been scratched away. In its place, carved deep into the plaster with what looked like fingernails, were two words. Our sisters. My mother let out a scream that shook the windows of the apartment block. She ran to the window, throwing it open, looking down into the courtyard below, but there was nothing there. Only the wet asphalt and the morning traffic. The police came again. The same detective, his face grimmer than before, stood in the living room, looking at the carved letters on the wall. My father was brought back in handcuffs. They had found him in a bar down by the canal, completely drunk, mumbling about a girl in a yellow raincoat who had stolen his keys. Where is she? My mother screamed at him, clawing at his chest as the police held her back. What did you do with my baby, Arthur? What did you do to Gracie? I didn't do anything, my father sobbed, his eyes wild and bloodshot. I saw her, Laura. I saw Hannah. She was holding the baby. She was standing on the bridge by the old kiln. I tried to run after them, but they just jumped. They jumped into the water, and there wasn't even a splash. The detective sighed, a heavy, tired sound. He looked at my parents with a mixture of pity and disgust. We've dragged the canal, Mr. Lynn, the detective said. We've searched the kiln. There's nothing there. No baby. No clothes. Nothing. He put his notebook away, turning toward the door. You too. You did this to yourselves, he said quietly. You couldn't handle the guilt of what you did to your first daughter, so you let your minds rot from the inside out. Now you've lost both of them. The police left, taking my father back to the station for questioning. My mother was left alone in the empty apartment. She didn't clean the nursery. She didn't paint over the scratched letters on the wall. She sat in the rocking chair beside the empty crib, her eyes fixed on the window, rocking back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes, when the wind was strong and the rain beat against the glass, she would hear a sound. Not a cry. Not a scream. Just a soft, baby's coo, followed by the sound of a 13-year-old girl's laughter echoing from the dark corners of the empty room. And down by the old, abandoned brick kiln in the West District, deep within the dark, dry earth where the rain couldn't reach, two girls sat together in the dark. One was 13, her arms healed and clean, her yellow raincoat dry and warm. The other was 6 months old, her dark eyes shining in the dark, her small hand wrapped tightly around her sister's finger. They didn't need their parents anymore. They had each other.